Located in the eastern region of Russia was a small town. An old woman who was terminally ill had hired a nurse. The nurse found that the woman had not moved from her bed or spoken for several years. Instead, she lay there looking as white as a washed tablecloth, staring at the ceiling, waiting for death, which never came. The job was not too demanding. The nurse's daily tasks involved squeezing yogurt and liquid soup into the old woman's mouth with small spoons after pressing her hard gray lips with her fingers. She also helped the old woman turn over, who was as light as a large rag doll, and used a special lotion to wipe her yellow, wax-like skin to prevent pressure sores. One day, the nurse arrived to tend to the old lady and was startled to see her eyes had turned completely white, resembling those of a dead bird. The old woman's mouth was agape, and her jaw had shifted to the side. Despite knowing that calling an ambulance would be futile, the nurse did so anyway. Her fears were confirmed when a fatigued woman in a grimy white coat reprimanded her for summoning them for a deceased person. "You should have called the morgue right away. However, they won't come until tomorrow morning due to the snowstorm outside. Place a handkerchief on her jaw and open the windows. Nothing will happen to her." I was reluctant to spend the night in the same apartment as a deceased elderly woman. However, due to circumstances beyond my control, the deceased's relatives had already left for the regional center and were not expected to return until the following morning. With nothing to occupy her time, the nurse searched through the closet and found a handkerchief. She used it to gently close the deceased woman's eyes, avoiding any prolonged contact with the woman's face as she did so. Instead, she focused on her own thoughts, specifically her hopes for a bright future with Ivan, the truck driver she had been seeing for 3 months and was considering marrying. After covering the old woman with a thin wool blanket, the nurse opened the window and left the room, closing the door behind her. Surprisingly, she dozed off quite swiftly, but her sleep was uneasy and interrupted. The nurse had dreams of dreary, port cities enveloped in gray mist, accompanied by the bellowing of ship horns and the cries of seagulls hovering over turbulent waters. Suddenly, she became aware of a sound of footsteps shuffling through her dream, as if someone was walking down the corridor slowly, struggling with every step. She sat up on the bed, rubbed her eyes, and then draped her robe over her shoulders before stepping out into the corridor. As soon as she stepped out into the corridor, she saw the old woman leaning against the wall, struggling to walk, with her knees buckled. It appeared that the old woman was trying to make her way to the restroom. Initially, the nurse was not frightened by the sight. Instead, her first thought was that the doctor must have been mistaken. She was horrified that the old woman had been left with the window wide open in the midst of a frosty snowstorm, and her scarf had been tied so tightly it almost appeared to strangle her. However, the nurse found it peculiar that the grandmother was walking, since she had been bedridden for the past 2.5 years. She worried that the old woman might fall and break her femoral neck. Acting quickly, the nurse rushed forward and supported the old woman by the elbow. "Be careful, be careful. Why didn't you call me?" the nurse exclaimed. The old woman was unsteady and appeared even paler than usual, with her eyes shut tightly. Abruptly, she uttered a feeble and husky whisper. "Help me, my hands," she whispered. It was as if the nurse was hearing her voice for the first time. "Can I assist you? Let me take you to bed. Would you like some hot tea with jam, perhaps?" the nurse asked kindly. "No, my arms," she repeated in a monotonous tone. "Please help me, they won't straighten. Please unbend my arms," she pleaded. It was only then that the nurse noticed that the old woman's arms were folded across her chest, as if she were already deceased. "Easy, easy now," the nurse said. However, when she attempted to touch the old woman's hands, she pulled them back as if they were a red-hot frying pan. The old woman's hands were icy and rigid, and upon closer inspection, the nurse noticed purple spots on her face in the dim light. In a frenzy, The nurse quickly retreated to her own room and securely locked the door using a nearby desk. Her heart was racing, and she felt a sense of panic overcome her. This couldn't be happening. It just couldn't be real. Despite her disbelief, it was real. The old woman had been walking down the hallway with her eyes closed, face pale, and movements cautious and deliberate. The nurse could hear her faint voice from behind the closed door. "I need your help. Why did you leave me? My arms won't unbend. Please, unbend them. Come out. Open the door." The old woman's faint voice pleaded from outside the door. The nurse had lost track of time, but when the old woman's voice fell silent, she noticed that it was already morning outside the window. With caution, the nurse finally looked out of her room, but there was no one in the hallway. Despite her fear, she slowly made her way to the old woman's room, which had its door tightly closed. The nurse couldn't explain what was driving her to continue down this path, and why she couldn't simply leave the apartment and forget what had happened. The old woman rested on the bed, with her arms folded across her chest and a handkerchief tied around her jaw. Frost had formed on her white cheeks. The only peculiar thing was that the woolen blanket, which had been draped over the old woman when the nurse had left, was now crumpled on the floor. The woman stayed until the car from the morgue arrived, and then she left the house, never to return again.